Here, my door's open. I got my drawers down. Come on in.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
So in the last episode, we covered, or started to cover, the 10 myths about HIPAA compliance. And we went through the first 3 in the first episode. And so this is going to be the second of a 3-part episode in which we're going to cover a few more of those myths that we run into quite often. And so we're just going to dive right in. If you missed the first episode, then you can go back to it and listen to the first 3. So we're going to dive right into number 4. And the number 4 myth is communicating with patients via email, fax, or telephone violates HIPAA. So, Donna, let's talk about whether or not that is true or false.
It's actually not true. But like everything else with HIPAA, you need to do reasonable and appropriate protections in place in order to use email, fax, telephone properly.
Okay. And now there's probably a lot of debate, especially around the email aspect of that and how that's supposed to happen. And I think you probably tell your clients the same thing I tell mine, which is just don't send any PHI over email if you can help it, instead of trying to, figure out, should I send it encrypted or should I not send it encrypted? If you can at all get around it, just don't even do it at all.
Well, yeah, because, I sit in, on the discussion boards and you hear even the big organizations and the frustrations they have with making sure that people are using the tools to encrypt things when they should. And for them, they've got all of the expensive technology in place that smaller organizations are never going to have. So it's easier to just say, don't do it. And you establish how you can communicate things within your organization via email, because you can get to things. So while an account number with a patient name now makes it identifiable, a random number with nothing else that says in an email 45729, and then it says, hey, check out that patient and let me know what you think about how I'm billing this. That email, clearly you can't track it down to an individual unless, of course, when you have a super knowledge and you break into everything and you have access to the EHR and you have access to the email and all, okay, and then I could put it together. So that's reasonable to believe that someone's not going to do it, and therefore it would be appropriate in our environment. But that means you got to make sure that everybody understands that, because it wouldn't be the first time. I know, I'm sure you've gone through it just like I have, is that we tell them that, and we give them those rules, and then they get comfortable. And then the next thing you know, they're giving you an account number, a date of birth, first initial, last name, and I'm, whoa. You can't do that, because now it's becoming a little bit more tricky and becoming a bit more likely that you could re-identify somebody.
One thing that I tell my smaller clients is that if at all possible, if you have to have somebody sending that out over email, then designate a person to do that, so that you don't have to worry about having 10 different people, which will be 10 different possible problems. You have one person that's in charge of that. And I think that seems to work well for the smaller organizations, at least the ones that I've dealt with.
Well, and then you have the flip side of it too, is the patient tells you, I want you to email me my medical information. And people shut down and they say, we can't do this and all those kind of things. But the bottom line is the patient is allowed to tell you they don't care about security. But we always recommend that you protect yourself and make sure that you tell the patients, look, if you want us to send your information in unsecured manner, we will, but you need to understand that you're outside of the HIPAA protections when you do that. and get them to sign off on it before you ever do it. And so now a lot of people are putting that in with their new patient forms and follow-up forms and those kind of things. So you can't tell a patient, I refuse to give you this information, if the patient says they don't care about security. And we know there are plenty of people, they're just like, here, my door's open, I got my drawers down, come on in.
Oh, God.
Well, it's almost like they're digital exhibitionists out there. There's so many of them, and it scares me to death. I have family members where I'm begging them, please let me teach you how to do a good, solid password, at least that, and don't bother me.
Here's what you hear people say, and they don't understand the complexities of what their information means in the wrong hands. What I hear people say is, they say things like, well, if people get a hold of my information, then they're going to be bored to tears of what they read, or something like that. It's almost, they think of it as they're just prying into their privacy, and that's not really the danger. The danger is not the fact that we found out that you had, a thrombosed hemorrhoid or something like that. That's not the real danger. The danger is what they can do with that information.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like, there's so many cases. It's the exact same thing, where I see, and I'm sure that there are like detectives that must go through this, where they see all the bad stuff all the time. So they're always terrified where their kids are at, and their family. They just see what can really happen. And we see it all the time, and other people are just like, oh, no big deal. And it's actually quite a big deal, because it's criminals that are getting this, not your nosy neighbor. It's not Gladys Kravitz next door out there looking around seeing why you went to the doctor. Most of the time, it's going to be a criminal, and criminals are not getting this information to just read it and laugh at you.
And on the same note of email, too, this is actually a problem I ran into with a client a couple of years ago, that they were sending out email blasts, and they were not blind carbon copying people. So every patient got every other patient's email address and name and everything. So if you do have to do a mass email, number one, I would recommend using a service for that, something like MailChimp or GetResponse or Constant Contact or something like that. But even then, you still have to be careful when you start doing mass emails or marketing. That can be a whole nother podcast around marketing. And
well, there's a section in the privacy rule about what you can and can't do for marketing.
Right.
So when it comes to communicating via email, fax, telephone, all of those things, yes, you can do that. And you can have a secure email program, and there are plenty of them out there. But often the person on the other end gets frustrated because it's hard for them to open, or you have to have some sort of shared key, or they have to go through extra steps. They can't just read it, and a lot of people are going to get frustrated about that. Or you have a problem on the front end where your employees forget to initiate that because every single email isn't going out encrypted. So, yes, but no.
You can do it. Just be careful.
Yeah, you can do it, but don't do it. That's it. Don't screw it up.
So moving on to number 5. HIPAA compliance is just like all the other compliance rules of other industries. You learn the requirements, and then you do what they say. Is that true or false?
Well, I don't know. You took my class. How easy was it? Don't blame the teacher.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, honestly, it is. Compliance, most compliance is complicated, and HIPAA seems to be more so for people because it's sometimes it's a little more vague, which you and I know the part that people complain about it being vague is actually a good thing, because it gives you some wiggle room to make some decisions, and you're not forced to do things a certain way all the time.
Well, and I mean, the entire law, when you look at the complicated environment that is our massive medical industry in the United States. I mean, it's huge, massive chunk of our entire economy. So there's all levels of complication and millions of different businesses involved and tied to it, all have to then be covered by the exact same law. So one law that addresses a wide variety of a massive market and everything from a single person working by themselves to a massive enterprise with thousands or hundreds of thousands of people following the exact same protocols and requirements. It has to be gray. There has to be room for interpretation. And that list of considerations to determine the reasonable and appropriate, you have a list, it's built into the law, of the things that you can consider when deciding what's reasonable and appropriate in your environment. And don't ask me what that is right now. I need it. I don't have it. I'm done.
And it's even more complicated for business associates, I think. Number one, because a lot of business associates aren't necessarily, quote unquote, in the medical industry. So when they read the regulation, it talks about things that they're not familiar with a lot of times. And then the other thing is that some of the regulation talks about things that they don't have to deal with. And so that makes it confusing. They don't understand, okay, what part of this applies to me?
Oh yeah, there's nothing more stressful than to give the news to someone who has spent weeks working on one element trying to figure out how they're supposed to do it, and the reason they can't figure it out is because they're not supposed to do it.
Yes. Oh, that's not for you.
You're not going to like me very much, but you don't have to do this.
Yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet thing.
Although that is rare that we get to tell somebody, well, this part you don't have to do. It's very rare.
Yeah. And that's really the whole premise why we also built the resource HIPAA for MSPs is around what IT companies and MSPs need to know about compliance, because we ran into the same thing I did when I went through the training. I ran into the same thing about how much of this applies to me and what do I really need to know. And it was very confusing when I started looking at things, and it was talking about doing things with and I just had no idea. It's like, I don't even have this stuff. I don't even know what this stuff is. I don't even know what this acronym is. And you're telling me I had to protect it. What is it?
It does. And it creates, there are some people who are clearly confused even about whether or not they're supposed to. How do you identify? There's just so much confusion because, again, it's a massive market that is just really starting to grasp these requirements, and it's not something we can play around with, and there's too many cases of problems. So it is a huge thing, and it makes it much more complicated for people to review all the pieces and parts and determine what fits best in their environment. And just to make up for my moment of not having things, I now have in front of me, you know where I'm going, the list of things that you can consider to determine what's reasonable and appropriate. And this is why it is not like everything else, because you have to make these decisions. You're allowed to make these decisions because of the complexities of the environment, but you have to document why you made these decisions and know 5 years from now why you made those decisions. And you're allowed to determine what's reasonable and appropriate in your environment. It's under the section that talks about flexibility of approach. And when working specifically with the security measures, you can take into account the size, complexity, and capabilities of your organization, the technical infrastructure, hardware, and software security capabilities of the organization, the cost of the measures, and then my favorite, the probability and criticality. First of all, I know you're impressed that I was able to say that without stumbling, of potential risk to EPHI. So that alone confuses most people, and they just shut down. So it's not like every other kind of thing. You have people, when you look at, PCI compliance is pretty straightforward. And yes, there's a lot of compliance in the financial industry and the banking industry that require a lot of things. But generally, you don't have banks that are one person. It's not some single individual having to follow those banking institution laws. So there you have it. It is yet another myth.
And HIPAA is one of those compliance regulations that it's a moving target. I think that's the biggest problem that people have with it, is that, and especially in IT, because we love lists. Hand me a list
and I'll go do it.
I want to check off A, B, C, D. Yes, I went down the list. I'm done. And you just can't do that with compliance. It's very different from client to client.
Even if you look, first of all, people have to understand, you go to a big organization and they have people that their entire jobs is risk managers. So risk management, risk analysis, risk mitigation, and all of these words. I don't know. You go to Dr. Smith's office in some small town, and no one there is a risk manager except when it comes to the protection of their patients from a clinical standpoint. They worry about what's a risk from a medical standpoint, and that is their focus. When you ask them about risk, that's, who manages risk? Well, so-and-so makes sure we follow the blood pathogen law, the rules, and protect everybody there. But what about the back doors open and all your laptops are sitting there? Well, that's not a risk. Ain't nobody around here wants it. That's assuming it's a southern rural town. But I'm sorry. The accent was assuming it's a southern rural town. You can go to a rural town anywhere and hear, nobody's going to get our stuff. We're good.
Yeah, who wants this mess? It's what I call the "it won't happen to me" syndrome.
Yeah. We don't need no stinking backup.
So moving on to number 6. A website is HIPAA compliant if it uses HTTPS. That's completely true, right?
And yet again, you're wrong.
False. So for those people who may not understand what HTTPS is, I'll do a brief synopsis of that. So basically the S stands for secure. So it's just a secure website in that there is a security certificate that handles the passage of the traffic in a secure manner as you're on the site, basically.
Yeah, all that worries about is the portion of the conversation between you sitting at your machine and the server who is talking to you. Well, that is should be encrypted. If it says HTTPS, you're going to have some level of comfort that it's encrypted. But we both know from our Encryption podcast that was released earlier, because now we have multiple episodes. I'm very excited. But in there, we talked about there's the need for encryption in transit and encryption at rest, and all the protections that need to be in place to keep the data, once it gets to that server, that's where your issue is.
So, and another thing to bring up, since we're talking about websites, is that having a cloud-based or website-based EMR does not in itself make you compliant.
No, not at all.
Number 7. If a vendor signs a business associate agreement, there's nothing else for me to worry about concerning that vendor. I almost laugh even reading that one.
I know.
I can't believe that's even a myth.
It used to be, because the business associate agreements, there was an obligation to sign them, but there was really no enforcement. No one was going to. The only enforcement built into the law was to enforce it against covered entities, and there was no one given the job of enforcing it or levying any fines. So there was no need to even worry about actually signing them. Most people just, do we really have to do this? And they would just throw together something, pull some template. But now those agreements really matter, and business associates better know what's in them as well as covered entities. So if you're signing stuff or thinking about signing stuff, you better have a full understanding of what it's committing you to do. Because most covered entities have the business associate agreement that's a template that somebody drew up for them, and they're not even paying attention to, hey, I may want some stricter guidelines in today's environment when I'm dealing with this particular vendor because of what they do for me. They don't look at it. Everybody uses the same thing. And a lot of covered entities will tell you, oh, I don't care, just send me yours. And they're not paying attention to any of the stuff that's going in there from the business associate itself. But once you get the agreement signed, that doesn't mean they're actually going to do anything unless you start asking them some questions about their program. You and I both have, we have to evaluate vendors all the time to use for our customers. And when we do those evaluations and we ask them questions and we say just a few things, simple questions, and you get responses, honest, true, this really happened response of, this doesn't apply to me, even though I signed a business associate agreement, all the things you're asking me to do that says that I will do, they tell me it doesn't apply. Or one of my favorites was how did they put it? Obviously you take HIPAA much more seriously than we do.
That's a scary comment.
I know. It's like, okay, so you're saying that you're going to do HIPAA, just not seriously do it. Okay. So we moved on.
You are a rocket surgeon.
That, we've gotten a lot of, we're sorry, HIPAA's not in our business plan. Everything about who you are requires you to do it. Oh, okay. Or we use such and such, and they are PCI compliant. Therefore, we don't need to do any of this other stuff.
Or all of our business associates are compliant. Therefore, we're compliant.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the famous last words of, we don't need to worry about our business associates. They know what they're doing.
That's particularly a problem with business associates in the IT field, because they'll go out and they'll get a backup vendor, and that backup vendor says, we're HIPAA compliant. And then that IT company resells that backup service to a covered entity, and they say, oh, we're HIPAA compliant because we're using a HIPAA compliant backup service. That just doesn't work that way. Your compliance isn't passed up or down. You still have your own things you have to do. And I've heard that several times. I'm using all these HIPAA compliant solutions, so I'm compliant. I'm like, no, you're not.
No, not at all. You have to do your own, and you have to meet your commitments to your customers and make sure that your business associates are doing their own. So the best way to get people to understand how far the business associate tail can go is the Stanford case with the collections company that had the spreadsheet from the Stanford Hospital ED, the emergency department. They're doing collections. They hire a business associate to do data analysis, create graphs and stuff for them. And the business associate gives it to an intern to do it, and the intern posts on a homework, help me with my homework kind of site or something, the entire 25,000 patient spreadsheet, because they didn't want to admit they didn't know how to do things. Clearly, the second business associate, whose two people the people in the Stanford group had no idea that other group existed, and it's that pursuing their main contact, their business associate, not making sure that they are checking on their downstream business associates. So that in itself has cost millions of dollars to the two business associates have already paid just in the California lawsuit over $3 million each. I mean, we're talking cha-ching. Lots of money. So you need to take care of your business associates because it can bring your business down and your clients down. And it's not a place that you want to go. So to just have them assume, had that business associate at least gotten some kind of, well, and we don't know all the details, but my guess is they paid over $3 million. They didn't ask them a lot of questions about how secure they were going to make sure that data was. And the fact that they have a kid that's an intern clearly was not trained in how you should be treating the data that you have access to. Mm-hmm. So there's no training program. Big red flag. My training is only a video that we make everybody watch when we hire them. Huge red flag. They don't have security awareness programs. They're not reminding them regularly. It's not going to happen. I always say that employees, as adults, we all think that we grow up and we're no longer kids. I'm pretty sure we all top out at high school. Think about it. You got the popularity contest. You got the clicks. You got the it wasn't me. It all happens at work. So people are going to do, when I meet with physicians or CEOs and I try to tell them, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a boss that I had years ago, and we won't go into that again. It was a long time ago. The one important thing that I should always keep in mind is your employees, no matter what kind of leader you are, whether you're leading in an organization, a nonprofit, you're leading your family, you're leading a group of anything, or at work, the people who are the leaders need to understand that those below you, most of them are going to do a little bit less than what you do. And then the ones below them are going to do a little bit less than what they do. So if you don't have the utmost integrity with what you're planning on doing and where you want everybody to be and set that example, it's not going to happen by the time it gets to the bottom.
Typically, people will only do as much as they have to do to get by.
Yeah.
and that's it.
Again, topped out at high school.
Yep.
It's just, the mentality and those kind of things of how people, it's as I often say to other business owners when we talk, and they'll be frustrated with people that work for them. And I was like, if they saw what you saw, they probably wouldn't be working for you. They'd be a competitor. Mm-hmm. So don't ride them, value them, and help foster their growth, because that's your only option. Well, the same thing applies with your business associates. If you want a business to work with you, then foster the same kind of leadership down to them. I'm expecting these things from you to protect this information that we have so that we can protect our customers' reputation, our reputation, the patient's privacy, the patient's health. We need to protect all of those things and take it seriously. And as the leader, no matter whether it's your business being a leader or you specifically being a leader, set that bar.
There we have it. There's 4 more for you in the can. So we're going to go ahead and end this episode with that. And the next episode will be the last in the series of 3. And we'll cover the last 3 myths and talk about those in detail. Until next time, go visit our website at HelpMeWithHIPAA.gov. leave us a comment or a question. We also ask that you shoot on over to iTunes and leave us a review and listen to our podcast. And we thank each and every one of you
Shower us with love and attention. We need
absolutely. And we do.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at HealthIT.gov. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.